o'clock, so let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Verde Valley Science Cafe, streaming live from the beautiful Verde Valley here in the heart of North Central Arizona. I'm Drew Cannon. Briefly before we begin this evening, for those who aren't familiar with the concept of a science cafe, so it's kind of a movement springing up in communities worldwide where individuals whose field of study and careers that are related to STEM, which is an acronym that stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So they meet with you and me, the public, in an informal setting outside of their labs, their classrooms, or organizations' offices in order to just have an informal conversation about their areas of expertise. Our Science Cafe here in the Verde Valley is hosted by Yavapai College and is made possible through a grant from the National Science Foundation with a mission to develop and support partnerships that help shift cultural awareness to target and enhance informal STEM learning for all ages here in our rural community, right here in our home, the Verde Valley. Before COVID-19, these sessions might meet in person in a relaxed environment, such as a coffee house, a restaurant, or perhaps even a wine tasting room. But for now, anyway, we're doing it virtually from the comfort of our homes. So relax, grab a beverage or snack, and let's enjoy an evening of discovery. And we do really want to encourage you to ask questions. And we hope you have many this evening. And this is how it will work. So as you're thinking of your questions during our discussion and presentations, please use the Zoom meeting Q&A box to enter your questions, and I'll relay them to our guests. And the way you find that, if you go to the bottom of your screen with your mouse, and there's a Q&A button, just click on that, and then you can type in your questions. As I said, as you think of them, just go ahead and enter them. So let's talk about our topic this evening, community science. What is community science? So I had to go to my friend Wikipedia, and I searched on community science. So community science, which is also known by many other terms, such as citizen science, crowdsourced science, civic science, or volunteer monitoring. And by the way, in a moment, our guest Kal Mannis will explain why the term community science is now becoming the preferred term. So community science is scientific research that's conducted in whole or in part by amateur or non-professional scientists. Community science is sometimes described as public participation in scientific research, participatory monitoring, and participatory action research, whose outcomes are often advancements in scientific research by improving the scientific community's capacity, and that's important, capacity, as well as increasing the public's understanding of science. And some well-known community scientists include a few names you might be familiar with, like Isaac Newton, Florence Nightingale, Benjamin Franklin, and Charles Darwin. And first uses of the term citizen science can be found in the magazine New Scientist and in campaigns to raise awareness of acid rain. An example of community science discovery is that of the planet Uranus, which was first observed by William Herschel in 1781. And you may have heard recently in the news, this was pretty exciting. Last July, Wolf Kukier, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, he's a 17-year-old high school student from New York. He's interning at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and was tasked with going through data on star brightness from the facility's ongoing Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite Mission. It's also known as TESS, or TESS. So he discovered a previously unidentified planet 1,300 light years from Earth. It is about 6.9 times larger than Earth, and it is now known as TOI 1338-b. And our guest Kal will also touch on TESS in his presentation in a bit. So I'm going to start with our first poll here. This is an audience poll, and the question is, have you participated in a community science project before? And let's just see what y'all what your experience with it has been. So we're getting some results in. And let's see. So it looks like we've stabilized. So it looks like about 5 out of 20, 5 out of 21 have, 15 have not, and 1 not sure. That's great. So we hope that you all learned something this evening. Let me go ahead and end the poll. There's the results. All right. So this evening, we are indeed fortunate to have 4 distinguished guests, including Dr. Nancy Steele, who is the Executive Director of Friends of the Verde River, Tracy Stevens and Elaine Nichols, also from Friends of the Verde River, and Kal Mannis, Senior Director for Rural Programs at the Arizona Science Center. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us this evening. And we're going to start our discussion with Dr. Nancy Steele. And as I previously mentioned, Nancy is the Executive Director of Friends of the Verde River. She returned to her native Arizona in 2018 to lead the Friends. And this is an organization that works collaboratively for a healthy flowing Verde River system. Nancy is a trained biologist who has dedicated most of her career to river conservation and watershed health. In California, she founded a land trust, the Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy, and was the executive director of the Council for Watershed Health. Prior to working in nonprofit management, she worked on environmental policy in California state government with a focus on reducing environmental hazards from lead pollution and toxic diesel emissions. And Nancy is also a co-owner in her family beekeeping business. She is a fellow of Arizona's Flynn Brown Civic Leadership Academy, the Durfee Foundation, and the Robert and Patricia Schweitzer Foundation. Nancy earned her doctorate in environmental science and engineering from UCLA, received her Master of Science degree from Arizona State University, and her bachelor's degree from Occidental College. So welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for that intro, Drew.
Yeah, sure. So Nancy, I know you have a presentation you'd like to share with us. And while you bring up the presentation, I know you'll be touching on who are the Friends of the Verde River and why the Verde River is really one of the most important waterways in Arizona, if not the US. And also you'll be sharing some of the interesting community science projects that you've been involved with throughout your career. To the audience, please enter your questions in the Q&A box as you think of them. Nancy is open to us asking questions as she's going through her presentation. So I'll be monitoring that, and take it away, Nancy.
Thank you, Drew, and thanks to all of you for joining. And yes, I definitely want this to be a conversation. So if you've got any question, just pop it into the Q&A, and I'll try and get to it as I'm going. I'm first going to tell you just a little bit about Friends of the Verde River. As the executive director, I don't think contractually I can give a presentation without pitching my organization. So as Drew said, Friends works collaboratively for a healthy flowing Verde River system. And that word collaboratively, which I can't even say smoothly, it simply means that we work in partnership with organizations and people that share our vision of a healthy and flowing Verde River system on into the future. We work in the areas of water, land, and communities. And of course, climate change is very important for the health and longevity of the Verde River, as it is for us all. The Friends of the Verde River, I should say, is an organization that's about 10 years old. We have a board, those people on the left, and a staff of amazing people on the right. And you'll be hearing from 2 of them, as Drew said earlier, Tracy and Elaine. We'll be talking a little bit about our community science program. So I always like to start with a placemaking set of slides with kind of 2 goals. I want to tell you where we are and illustrate and tell you something about the Verde River And also, I don't want to assume that you know what a watershed is. So what is a watershed? This image shows the major watersheds in Arizona, the 10 major watersheds in Arizona. And the Verde here is number 5. And simply what a watershed is, it's just a physical, a geographical boundary, a geographical high point, similar, almost actually exactly like a continental divide. So the water that falls on one side of this line flows towards the Verde River. On the other side, if you're looking at my cursor, would flow, say, to the little Colorado River. So this watershed is about 6,600 square miles. It's almost 6% of Arizona's land area. And it's very important not only to the people who live in the watershed and enjoy this 192 mile river, but also to the people in metropolitan Phoenix, because Phoenix, if you know anything about your geography and history of the city of Phoenix, it was founded essentially at the confluence of the Salt River, the Verde River, the Agua Fria, and the Gila rivers all come together here, which allowed this city to grow. And Phoenix still gets a considerable amount of its water from the Salt and Verde watersheds. This is the Salt watershed over here and the Verde watershed here. This is an ancient place. It has been occupied as long as we know, as long as we have history for. And today it's home to 6 different tribes and nations, from the Yavapai up in the very far north of the watershed, all the way down to Fort McDowell Yavapai and the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community in the Phoenix area. The highest point in the watershed, you might be surprised, is Humphreys Peak. And then the lowest point of the watershed is at that confluence where it meets with the Salt River. The Verde is not just, as I said, what we think of in the Cottonwood and Oak Creek, this middle area, but it is about 192-mile river that starts in the Chino Basin, not too far from the city of Paulden, the community of Paulden. And there are 13 cities that are in the watershed, all are partially in the watershed, 4 counties, 4 national forests, 13 wilderness areas. As I said, it's a big area, but just to point out, we get the pride of saying that the Verde has the only 2 wild and scenic rivers so designated by the federal government.
Nancy, well, I was going to ask you, so what does wild and scenic mean?
Yeah. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is about 50 years old. And it was an attempt by Congress at the time when Congress was doing such things to give protection to special rivers throughout the nation. And so communities, cities could nominate their rivers as long as they met certain important characteristics of being scenic, of being wild, of being important for recreation or for wildlife. They have to be flowing rivers. They can't be dammed up rivers. And so long ago, the right of way, this lower section in purple of the Verde River was designated wild and scenic. I think it was not long after the act was enacted, was adopted by Congress. And then about a decade ago, I'm a little shaky on the actual date, this section of Fossil Creek was added to the designation. And someday we hope to get the Upper Verde designated as wild and scenic also. So let's talk about community science.
Nancy, I've got a question here. So okay. Does Fossil Creek flow into the Verde?
Yes, Fossil Creek is a tributary to the Verde.
Okay. And another question, why is just part of the river wild and scenic?
Well, it's a good question. That would probably take a book or at least a really long article to go into all the details. But this section through the Middle Verde has a lot of diversions. And a diversion is a place where somebody a long time ago put in a little dam, built a little ditch, and diverted that water away from the river to water their field. Irrigated agriculture, in other words. There's some 67 diversions in the Verde watershed. And so it was felt that because the Wild and Scenic River designation wants a river to be free flowing and not dammed up, these diversions were considered disqualifying for this section of the river to be designated. And I don't know why the Upper Verde wasn't designated in the first place, or all the rest of these tributaries. You've got, East Verde down here. We've got West Clear Creek. We've got Sycamore and Oak Creek. All of these are eligible for designating. So perhaps in the future, we'll see that happen.
Well, in Clarkdale, there's the dam that
is just coming down.
Is coming down. So if those diversions were removed, would that potentially allow it to become wild and scenic in the future, or once it's dammed, is that it?
Well, no, it's a good question, because none of these dams completely impede the flow of the river. They're really ditch diversions. And so it's in some cases, it's just a person with a backhoe digging a ditch. But these are, I should say, these are historically designated water rights. And so the people that, we're not going to get into water law here, but those are unlikely to go away, those diversions.
When Elaine noted that Fossil Creek used to be dammed at one time.
Yes, it definitely did used to be dammed. Yeah. Any other questions on where we are and what a watershed is and the Verde River itself? All right. Let me go on to talking about community science. And mainly when Drew asked me to do this, I thought it would be fun to just tell you some stories and ways that community science has impacted me. But I do have a few intro slides. And I think Drew already really went over the history of science and community science. I went kind of way back in time, found some really old illustrations of people doing science. And just to emphasize the idea that people have always done science, as long as I think that's kind of a characteristic of being human, is being curious about the natural world. And where that curiosity leads you is to asking questions and then wanting to answer those questions. And there you are, you're doing science. So it is really, we've had this period of time where science has gotten very rigid in the sense of you had to have a degree in it to call yourself science. And so community of science was really that's almost that democratizing, that bringing it back to, if you're curious and you seek to answer questions that you have about the natural world, you're a scientist too. And then one of the stories I wanted to talk about is birding, because one of the oldest official community science projects is birding, if you want to call it a project, just birding itself. And birding, people, when there were a lot fewer of us on the planet and a lot more animals that were not human on the planet, animals were simply there for consumption, for providing clothing, for fashion, and warmth, and all those things that you can do, and anything you can get from an animal. And so in the 1800s, this was a big thing. It became a competitive sport of the leisure class, this thing called a Christmas bird hunt. And this cartoon came out in, what does it say, I can't see it on my screen.
1911?
1911, there we go. In response to a man named, what was his name, ornithologist Frank Chapman. In 1900, he proposed a new idea. Instead of killing birds competitively, how about if we count them instead? And so if you're a birder, if you enjoy, looking at birds and counting them, then that's the origin of it. And so it's gone from, again, competitive killing to now it's competitive counting, you could say. And records of birds then go back over a century, well over a century, and have allowed us to understand our natural world a lot better. There were some publications recently in the last decade or so, talking about the decline of songbirds. Actually, that was a publication came out, I think, in 2019, about a 30% decline in songbirds worldwide, which is very, very disturbing and has caused a lot of alarm about the consequences not only of climate change but population growth. But really the data for that information was all crowdsourced. It came from these Christmas bird counts. It came from, and a couple of other crowdsourced bird counts that these records have, that we have going back a century. And so when I go out walking on a bird walk now, I take out my app, my eBird app, and I try to count birds, not just say that I saw one, but did I see 5, or did I see a dozen, or did I see 20? So that's really one of the earliest and longest running sets of information that has come out of community science is bird.
Oh, and just to clarify, so eBird is an app that you can download onto your smartphone.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I did want to, though, say that there is still a reason for scientists, and I know some people have a problem with this. There still is a reason for scientists to collect information by actually killing a wild animal and putting it into a collection. But that has, the number of collections has really declined over time. I found a table published by Greg Pauly, who's a herpetologist at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And he added up the number of specimens that had been added to museum collections, not just birds, but all museum specimens that have been cataloged in Los Angeles County. And over about a century, there were around 24, almost 25,000 museum specimens that were cataloged. And that kind of cataloging of animals, plants and animals, by collecting them and putting them in a lab or an herbarium, it peaked in the 1950s through the 1970s, and then it dramatically started, declining. People stopped collecting because scientists were aware of the potential harm to the natural world and to populations of birds and plants from this activity. And that's around the time when these apps started really rising and making a significant contribution to science. So let's turn now to apps, since you asked that. Is there any questions before I go on?
Let's see.
Okay.
Questions? I don't see any right now.
Okay. So again, talk about eBird a little bit. This was a map I took off of the internet a few days ago of eBird collections. They don't go by how many total individual birds were collected, but rather by the species observed and the checklists that have been contributed. And unfortunately, I'm not quite sure of the time frame of this, whether this is an annual, or over a longer period of time. But one of the things we have to be careful about with apps is you'll see that certain parts of the world have darker colors in this so-called heat map, and certain parts of the world don't have any information contributed at all to eBird. And so whenever we're doing community science, we want to make sure that we're drawing the proper conclusions from the information. And so eBird hasn't penetrated the whole world. is what you can take away from this. But it's penetrated a lot of it, and we do have a lot of information about birds now that we wouldn't have had without this app. I want to spend more time, though, talking about iNaturalist.
Oh, going back to your slide, I was just curious about 7709 complete checklist. What's a complete checklist?
Yeah, so with eBird, when you go out and turn it on, you're tracking basically over a period of time. So they get a checklist from you, includes the time that you were out birding, the length of time, and where you went. You don't have to tell them this information, but it gives them the most information. And then when you're done birding, it asks you, is this a complete list of all the birds you saw? And then if you hit yes, and then you submit it, then it's a complete checklist.
Oh, okay. And we've got a question. So Nancy said that she uses Cornell Labs Merlin Bird ID app. Can you elaborate on how eBird versus other apps use the data and who collates it?
Yeah, so Cornell is the originator of both, or the owner of both eBird and Merlin. And I love Merlin app. In fact, I meant to put a slide up about Merlin. I must have just forgotten to do that because I love Merlin. Merlin is what I got started with. Merlin is an app, and it's MERLIN. Merlin is an app that will identify a bird within 5 questions. So what is the date? Where am I? What's the size of the bird? What are the main colors, 3 main colors on the bird? And where did you see the bird? Is it on a pond? Is it in a tree? Is it on a feeder? Is it, flying in the air? And with those 5 questions, they give you a list of birds, pictures. They show you a list of birds with their pictures, and you can say yes or no, this is my bird. And now, they didn't used to be this way, but now these eBird and Merlin are connected. When you say this is my bird, they will ask, do you want to send this information to eBird, or do you want to just save it within Merlin? So you can choose with Merlin whether or not you want to have that bird recorded in this worldwide database. And so if you have concerns about privacy, you want to probably stick with Merlin and not send your data over to eBird, because then it doesn't, it's just your list of birds.
Let's see. We've got another question from Roman. The decline of the bird population, is it attributed to pesticides or what else?
Yeah, so there isn't one specific answer to that question. I actually just wrote a column about it, which will be published later this month in the Cottonwood Journal Extra and the Camp Verde Journal, I think. So population growth has contributed, human population growth has contributed to habitat loss. And with habitat loss has been a decline in the number of birds, both bird individuals and bird species, but mainly this study was about individual birds. Pesticides have been implicated, especially neonicotinoids, which is a long-lasting systemic herbicide that when seed companies will treat their seeds with it, and then when that plant grows, the entire plant is toxic and the seeds it produces are toxic. And there's been studies that have shown that when a small songbird eats as few as 3 to 5 seeds that have been treated with neonics, they lose weight. And you think, yeah, I'd like to lose weight. That's not such a bad thing. But if you're a migrating bird and you're already, only a couple of ounces in weight, and you lose a little bit of weight, that means you have to hang out for a few more days before you can get in the air and migrate. You have to keep eating. And if you're continuing to eat poisonous seeds, of course, then you're probably going to die. But even if you can find a clean food source and get into the air, if you've missed 3 to 5 days of flight time, you may not make it. just because you're not in good health. So herbicides are a big, herbicides and pesticides are also a likely source, a likely reason. Okay, let's move on to iNaturalist, because this is what really got me sucked in. I got into eBird several years after I started using iNaturalist. iNaturalist, I have to thank the Natural History Museum of LA County for turning me on to iNaturalist. I used to work in LA, and it is, as it says on this slide, a crowdsourced species identification system and an organism occurrence recording tool. In other words, you go out, you take a picture, you upload it, and it will, and then you can say, what is this? And the artificial intelligence will tell you what they think it is. And the really cool thing, if you look at, this is my my front screen from my iNaturalist as of, well, a couple of days ago. If you look at it, what it says is I've had 679 observations. I'm not the best person at entering things. But what you see over here on the right, where you see a 2 or a 3 or a 2, the brilliance of iNaturalist is I might be wrong, and the artificial intelligence might be wrong, or the picture might not be all that great. And so you've got identifiers that are people who are a bit smarter than me about identifying plants and animals and fungi, and they will get on the site and they will either say the AI was wrong and it's this instead. Like when I first entered the stock, evening stock, I just got it identified down to it's a flowering plant in the same family as stock. And then the first identifier said it's evening stock. And then a second identifier came along and said, yes, it's evening stock. Now that is science level information. And anybody who's looking for or studying evening stock or kangaroo rats or any of the observations I've made, they can use that in science. It's considered a science level observation.
And Stuart had a comment. He uses iNaturalist, and he said it's been very helpful in IDing various creatures he's seen.
Yeah, and like this one, again, you can't see the picture because it's a tiny picture, but this netleaf hackberry, this is a tree with no leaves on it. There's no flowers on it. It's just a trunk, right? It's just a tree, because netleaf hackberry is deciduous. And I really wasn't 100% sure it was netleaf hackberry. I thought it was maybe, but I put it into the system and it said yes. Now, I don't often get good enough pictures of birds to put into iNaturalist, but I thought I would throw these 2 birds in and just see what it came up as, because I had already identified them as a ring-necked duck and a canvasback duck. So I was really pleased when iNaturalist said, yeah, that is what you saw. And since I posted this, I've had identifiers confirm those as proper identifications. So these are in the iNaturalist database now. So I was expecting a question, it hasn't come in yet, but similar to the relationship between Merlin and eBird, I've had a number of people say, well, I use Seek. And I was like, what is Seek? I've never heard of Seek. So I looked it up, and Seek is kind of like Merlin. You don't have to create an account. You don't have to share the data. Nobody has to, know where you were on such and such a day when you were observing. That's Seek. An iNaturalist is, again, the one that allows you to contribute to community science and natural history. So if you were wondering about Seek versus iNaturalist, that's the difference.
Oh, we've got a question. So does iNaturalist ID insect bugs stages other than adults, such as larvae or pupae?
Yes, it does. It's pretty cool. we had on a garden plant, we had what I thought were 3 or 4 different caterpillars because they all looked different. We took photos, put them in iNaturalist, and found out that they were all the same species of caterpillar. They just had different morphs or body forms. They might have been different ages. Also, I have taken photos of bird feathers and had iNaturalist identify them. So that's pretty cool too.
It's neat, yeah.
I took this off of the iNaturalist website about 3 days ago. And in the history of iNaturalist, they're over 102 million observations and on this particular day, in this particular time, 343,000 species, 2 million, look all the way to the right, over 2.5 million observers, and 241 identifiers. Again, the identifiers, these are the scientists, the professionals or amateurs that have achieved that level of expertise, that they are the ones that confirm your identifications. And just on this particular day in the world, I thought it was interesting. There were still most of the, 3 of the 4 observations were from California, but 1 was from Las Cruces. So again, you can see it's not everywhere, but it's pretty interesting. It's got a lot more coverage of the world than eBird does.
We've got another question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know of any awesome, shocking finds using iNaturalist or iBird or eBird?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about some things, so hold that thought.
Okay.
And so anyway, I was curious about Arizona. So this was on the 15th. I said, just tell me how many species in Arizona. Getting close to 1 million in Arizona. Almost 30,000 observers, 1,200 identifiers, and over 13,000 species. And then I went to it today. So remember this number, 903,178 observations on February 15th. Man, look at that. In 3 days, 70,000 more observations.
Wow. And
6,000 more observers. So I'm not quite sure what happened in those 3 days, whether there was, something going on there in terms of a university, or it also could have had something to do with people not uploading their data. A lot of people that I've seen on who are, a lot of these identifiers, a lot of people that are professionals, they will batch up their observations and put them all in on one day. So that could have been what happened. But again, you can see the locuses, the centers, Phoenix, the Tucson and Southern Arizona. And then I think this is the Verde Valley up here. And then I'm not quite sure what's up there, because that's farther north than Arizona.
Maybe Flag. Oh yeah, you're right. It's a little further north. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see where these observations came from. But I didn't drill in. You can do that, but I didn't drill in that deeply.
So we've got a question. Can you please give some examples of how these observations and ice tiers are used?
Observations are used?
How they're used?
Okay, I'm getting there. So here's some stories. Okay. Now, the first story I'm going to tell you really doesn't have anything to do with iNaturalist, because I want to pull it back and say you don't have to be working with iNaturalist to be doing community science. And I just wanted to tell you this sweet, sweet story of the mountain lions of Southern California. This is a project of the National Park Service, so these aren't necessarily amateurs, but there's a whole community of people out there, far more than you can imagine, far more than I thought, who set up trail cameras in faraway places. I mean, it's in the middle of urban Los Angeles, but far away in the sense that it's not, not in their backyard even. And they set up these trail cameras and they get these incredible photos. Now, this photo was taken by a professional, and I need to give credit. This is, oh gosh. All right. I had the credit. Oh, I know where to find it. Because this is a photo that is by a professional photographer named Steve Winter of the National Geographic. It took him over 15 months of setting up this camera and resetting up this camera so that he could get this incredible photo of P22. Now, I can't see you if you raise your hands, but I'm hoping that some of you know who P22 is. He's been called the Brad Pitt of mountain lions. He's gorgeous, but he has a really serious problem with dating. He has the smallest home range of any mountain lion known in the world. His home range is essentially Griffith Park. I think it's 7 or 8 square miles. And he ventures out. He looks for girlfriends, but he doesn't have a girlfriend that lives with him. And he has inspired, as I said, many people to set up these trail cameras and capture and document mountain lions. And that data is shared. This is another way you can share your data. That data is shared on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the National Park Service and other researchers can use this information to identify specific mountain lions and where they're living and what they're doing. But anyway, this was just a gorgeous cheesecake shot I had to share with you of P22. We don't know how much longer P22 will live. He's pretty old for a mountain lion. But he's done his part to really excite people about nature in their backyard, even in an urban area like Los Angeles. So let's talk about another one. This is actually a really cool iNaturalist story. The folks at the Natural History Museum in LA, Greg Pauly is, I think, the lead researcher, but there's many others who work with him, realized that they started collecting data on lizards back in, I think, 2010 or the 2010s, before iNaturalist was even a thing. And then they merged that project with iNaturalist in a project called Rascals, Reptiles and Amphibians of Southern California. And they had a question they wanted to answer. They wanted to understand lizard mating, specifically mating by the southern alligator lizard, which lives in the Los Angeles area. And so they looked at iNaturalist for pictures of southern alligator lizards mating. And they also put a call out to people and said, please, if you see them mating, and you'll know they're mating because they're holding on, one is holding on to the other one, or in this case, 2 of them are holding on to the other one. The one in the middle there is the female. The 2 holding on to her are males who are competing for her. So this was such a fun story. It even made the New York Times. And they found, as I said, they've generated the largest data set ever on lizard mating. And they've had 3, conclusions. Weather has a big impact on breeding. They don't breed when it's wet, but yet wet years are the better years for breeding. So they don't like to breed when it's wet. I think you all can understand that. But it needs to be a good year for probably food sources for breeding. And then they can stay paired for up to 2 days, they've discovered. And they've also continued this research by looking at things like the age of the lizard, tail breakage, where they live, what might have caused the tail breakage, and also mites, because they found out that they can actually see the mites in these pictures. You can't see it in this picture there. I don't know that this lizard has any mites, but it might. They can see little specks. So they've been able to find out a lot about these lizards through mining iNaturalist. So I thought that was a pretty cool project.
We have a question going back to the mountain lion. Do these shared photos pose a threat from poachers who might use these sites to locate species they plan to poach?
Yeah, interesting question. It is illegal to hunt and kill mountain lions in California. And there's a pretty strong ethic in California against hunting, especially hunting mountain lions. It's very different than Arizona. And so I have not read of any instances of mountain lions being poached or hunted illegally in California as a result of these cameras. Now, the people who set up the trail cameras do guard the locations. They don't publish the locations on Facebook or Twitter or Insta. They would give that information if requested. And I know that because I personally know some of these people that do they call it camera trapping. Fun story. They wanted to collar a mountain lion that was living in the Verdugo Hills and P42. And I know the woman who had been had him on her camera trap, and she actually told the national park people pretty much when she thought he was going to come by. So they set up their snare trap for him, and sure enough, he got trapped just when she said that he would get trapped, because the males are creatures of habit. That's another thing they've learned. The females wander much more erratically or unpredictably, but the males are very predictable in where they go. So they were able to get that male collared with a minimum amount of distress to him, because they knew when he was going to be there, they could be prepared to get there quickly and tranquilize him and put the collar on him.
Another question. So how are these apps funded?
Yeah, that is a good question. So iNaturalist is a project of initially the California Academy of Sciences in California, which is a publicly funded agency of the state of California. And then National Geographic came in and has been funding it. Merlin and eBird are Cornell, private university, and I can't remember who the other partners are with Cornell, but if you look at their website, it'll tell you who the other partners are. There was actually an app that I found unrelated to community science, but there was an app that I found that was really cool, and then it went away, and I found out it was because they couldn't get funding to continue it. So these are not generally publicly supported. Even the California Academy of Sciences, while it's a California agency, it does get private funding also. It's a nonprofit. No, is it a nonprofit or an agent? It's an agency, but they also are able to get some funding. They get admissions and the like. So anyway, these things, yeah, if iNaturalist went away, and I don't think it will, but it would be a pretty big tragedy. They are not supported by the US government. Another image of the way we used to keep collections, plant collections. So let me tell two of my stories, two a little bit more personal than the ones I've been talking about. I like to take pictures mostly in the Verde. Along the river is a great place, but really anywhere is a great place. And in March 2 years ago, I saw these flowers, and I kind of knew what they were, but what are they? I wasn't quite sure. So I took a photo, uploaded them to iNaturalist, and oh yeah, cottonwood. How often do you get to see cottonwood flowers? Those flowers are usually, 20, 40 feet up in the air. But these were right at eye level. So I entered it into iNaturalist. On the right of the image is a map of some of my observations and a big green marker where I saw this one. And notice here, somebody favorited my observation, somebody named Earth Grazer. People can do that. They see a photo of something, they can fave it, and then that allows them to create a list of their favorite observations. Why did they want to do that? Well, I got a message from Earth Grazer, who turns out to be Jim and Lynn Weber of Austin, Texas, who are working on a book. I responded back. I would be more than happy to contribute. They sent me a permission form, which I signed. And someday I'm going to find that book. I haven't looked for it, but I'm going to look them up and find out if their book on moths and their host plants got published. because if it did, my photo's in that book.
So if you participate in community science, you could become famous or at least credited in a book, right?
Yeah, infamous, notorious.
Yes.
So anyway, that was the first time that happened to me in 2020. The next one was in some ways just as cool, even though it didn't result in my photo being used in a book. I was walking on my street one July monsoon day after a storm and saw this little red thing running across the road. And it was a big red thing. You can't really see, but I don't know, if you see something that's bright red and that's about a 1/4 inch long running across the road, it kind of catches your eye. So I bent over and I took a photo of it. Here's a little close up. And if you know anything about insects and arthropods and the like, this is a mite. It's a giant velvet mite when I put it into iNaturalist. And this person named Ray Fisher gave me a confirmation, no species, just the genus Dinothrombium of this creature called a giant velvet mite. So I thought that was really cool that I knew what it was. At least to the genus level. And here's the little bit more information, because with iNaturalist, you can look up more information. Here is a cool photo of it and a map of its distribution, which kind of illustrated that the one I saw was at the northern edge of its distribution. And then again, I got a message through the app saying that this guy is a researcher and he wanted to know more about it, wanted me to send him a specimen. And he explained that they only come out after rains. So a traditional collecting expedition was impossible. And so he relies on iNaturalist to find where these mites are. Now, unfortunately, I've never seen this mite again. I walk that street regularly and I always look down, and I haven't seen one again. But if I do see one again, he's requested that I do collect it because he wants to know exactly what it is, what the species is, and he wants to understand how it's related to other species, especially the ones from Southern California. So far this has been a dead end because I didn't see any in the monsoon any more that year, but maybe in 2022 I'll be walking along the road or somewhere else and I'll see that little mite, and I will collect it for science, because that's the only way he can tell exactly what species it is if I actually physically collect it. But the photo certainly helps him to put another dot on the map as far as where this mite is found. So those were my stories. I've probably taken up too much time because I know there's other speakers that want to talk.
Yeah.
So is there any other questions? Otherwise, that's the last of my slides.
Oh, we've got a question. Do you know if they're related all to velvet ants?
No.
Mites?
I have so many velvet ant photos in iNaturalist because I love them. They are the coolest thing. They are actually a wasp. And what you see running around on the ground that we call a velvet ant is a wingless female. And I had never seen the male until I was on the river. I was on the Colorado River in, upstream of Lee's Ferry, between the dam and Lee's Ferry, camping. And I saw this weird little creature that looked like a wasp. It wasn't weird. He looked like a wasp. And he was near a velvet ant. And so I took a photo of him and put it in. And it said, that's the male of the velvet ant. But those are the female female wasp.
Great. So thank you so much, Nancy. That was really great. And now we're going to go to our next guest. So that is Tracy Stevens. She is also with the Friends of the Verde River. And thanks for joining us, Tracy. Are you there? Are you on mute? There we go.
Yeah, sorry, just getting my presentation queued up.
Yeah, so I know you're going to share a presentation with us, and will you be talking a little bit about the upcoming local BioBlitz event?
Yeah, that's one of the topics I'll be talking about. We have our second annual BioBlitz coming up in late April through early May. And then I'll also be talking about some of the other national and regional opportunities that are available for community scientists.
There you go. I see your presentation.
Thanks, Drew. I appreciate that.
Sure.
So as Drew mentioned, I'm going to discuss some national, regional, and local community science opportunities today. One of the first ones I wanted to talk about was started in 2016 for the first ever Citizen Science Day, or what now would be Community Science Day. The teams at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County and California Academy of Sciences dreamed up the City Nature Challenge as a fun way to capitalize on their home city's friendly rivalry and hold a citizen science event about urban biodiversity. The first City Nature Challenge was an 8-day competition between LA and San Francisco, engaging residents and visitors in documenting nature to better understand urban biodiversity. Over 20,000 observations were made by more than 1,000 people in a 1-week period, cataloging approximately 1,600 species in each location, including new records in both areas. During the 2016 City Nature Challenge, there was so much excitement and interest from other cities that in 2017, the challenge went national, and in 2018, it became international, growing to 419 cities as of the 2021 City Nature Challenge. This year's event is April 29th through May 2nd, and several Arizona communities are participating, and actually the end of our BioBlitz overlaps with the City Nature Challenge. So we're going to look at participating as well. And this is another community science opportunity that uses the iNaturalist app. That's a very common app for these types of programs to use, since it's free and accessible to most people. As Nancy mentioned, birders are very competitive, and community science opportunities are a great way to use this competitive spirit. The Audubon Society has several community science opportunities, and I just wanted to touch on 2 of these events, the Christmas bird count and the backyard bird count, and they're always looking for more participants. The annual Christmas bird count is an important day for community science, encouraging birders of all levels to submit observations from locally organized bird counts. The Northern Arizona Audubon Society has 2 in the winter of this year. They were on January 1st and 2nd, so they're not always on Christmas, since that's a day that a lot of people may not have the time to participate. So they are scheduled, in that window. But one was held in Camp Verde and one was held in Flagstaff. So there's a couple of opportunities locally, but they're held throughout the country. So for those of you joining us not from Arizona, there may be an opportunity for you to participate in your community or wherever you happen to be in that time of year. Another opportunity is actually this weekend. The backyard bird count started today. It runs February 18th through the 21st. To participate, you just need to go birding anywhere, which can be in your backyard watching your feeder for 15 minutes, and then submit your observation to eBird. As Nancy mentioned, another common app. It's a free app and a great way to submit your observations and also learn more about the birds that you're observing. So those are a couple opportunities with the local Audubon chapter, but also our national efforts. So they coordinate those locally. A regional program, the Southwest Monarch Study, is another opportunity for community scientists to contribute valuable data. This also uses iNaturalist. Volunteers can report monarchs plus their immatures and track milkweed in the Southwest United States. So once you find and record monarch adults, eggs or the larval stages, also milkweed, your data helps scientists learn more about monarch breeding, migration, density, milkweed habitats in the region. And Arizona is one of the target locations. This data is really helpful as monarch numbers have been declining. And Nancy mentioned some of the issues with songbirds with neonicotinoids, and a lot of our pollinator populations, like monarchs, are affected by those as well. In addition, if you're interested in tagging monarchs, you can actually undergo training to tag monarchs in the fall, and then get your own tagging kits. And if you're interested in that, you can check out the Southwest Monarchs website for more information. A more local opportunity in the Phoenix area, the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance is an initiative of the Desert Botanical Garden. And together with regional partners, the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, or CASCA, developed a long-term strategy for the preservation of Maricopa County's open spaces to support a healthy ecosystem and provide beautiful, safe open spaces for recreation, education, and relaxation. And invasive species are one of the biggest threats to these healthy ecosystems, as we at Friends know quite well from our efforts on the Verde. In this case, what they're seeking are people to join the Desert Defenders program to help find and remove invasive plants. The Desert Defenders is a collaborative community science program focused on finding, mapping, and removing invasive species at local parks and preserves. They have a plant species list that they focus on and that are known to help, known to harm the ecosystems, and a few pose risks such as increased fire or impacting human health. So this effort is definitely a more local effort in Maricopa County, focused on invasive plants. Now I'll shift gears to our Verde Valley BioBlitz. In partnership with the Science Vortex and the City of Cottonwood, we held our first annual Verde Valley BioBlitz in the spring of 2021. A BioBlitz is a fun, informal event to get people of all ages excited about local plants and animals. Again, using iNaturalist, participants collect plant and animal data within the designated project area. And one of our goals of this event is to help inform our invasive species removal efforts through observers locating our species of concern. So we provide information about identifying those species to participants. During the 2021 event, 176 community members and students volunteered 285 hours over the 2 weeks of the event, and participants learned how to use iNaturalist to upload species. Their efforts helped us to further document other invasive species like the crayfish pictured here in the upper right. Another goal of the BioBlitz was to connect local community members and students with local wildlife and habitats. Participants had fun and were inspired to enjoy nature. We also wanted to make sure we were generating scientifically valuable data. Like I said, we wanted this to help with our restoration efforts and help us identify invasive plants. Over 1,000 observations of almost 400 species were uploaded to the project during the 2-week BioBlitz. And the participants did focus on the invasive plants, as the two most observed species were tamarisk and tree of heaven, which are two of our primary invasive species that we're worried about in the Verde Valley. Observers also learn how to identify those species and can help others learn as well. So to help us spread it and get the word out. Science Vortex summer camp students summarized the data. So we now have a baseline inventory, and it also helped further their knowledge of community science and how this type of data is used.
Tracy, so these observations, is this for BioBlitz, is it just within a Dead Horse Park, or is it throughout the Verde Valley?
Your question actually ties in well to my next slide.
Oh, good.
So the green dots on this map, and I apologize that they're very small, but this is the output for my naturalist. So this shows that we had observers throughout Verde Valley. If you can see my mouse, this is the Cottonwood area. So there were a lot focused by Dead Horse, but then we also had some, down here by the Oak Creek confluence, and then also up through Sedona and Village of Oak Creek and along Oak Creek in several areas. So we were able to spread throughout the watershed somewhat. We would like to expand that so that our efforts are going further downstream, towards Scottsdale and the confluence. But it was, encouraging that in the first year we were able to see observers throughout the Verde Valley. Does that answer your question, Drew?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Our second annual BioBlitz is planned for April 21st through May 1st. This is a free family-friendly event to help people become more familiar using iNaturalist and learn a little bit about the plants in the area. Especially, we'll be part of the Family Nature Fair during the Verde Valley Birding and Nature Festival on Saturday, April 23rd. And we'll be leading small group hikes about every half hour from 9 to 1 that day, and helping, like I said, people learn how to use iNaturalist and identify local plants and have some fun while they're outside learning a little bit about science. And then hopefully they'll go off on their own and upload some more observations and become an iNaturalist junkie, sort of like Nancy is. So once you download and set up your iNaturalist account, you can join our project by searching Verde Valley BioBlitz 2022. The other thing is several people mentioned that they had already been using iNaturalist. And if you're an experienced observer, we're also looking for field trip leaders for our 5th grade field trips in the Family Nature Fair on Saturday. And if you're an identifier, we'd love to have your help with our project. Another event tying into our BioBlitz is an introduction to iNaturalist nature walk that we're having tomorrow at Riverfront Park from 1:30 to 2:30. And Elaine, who will be speaking next, along with Lori from Science Vortex, will be there to help people learn about how to use iNaturalist. And this will be part of a mini BioBlitz kickoff to our larger event in April. So it'll be a great opportunity to learn how to use iNaturalist and hopefully get started towards using that to help us learn more about plants and animals and bugs and birds in the area.
You know where people are gathering at Riverfront Park specifically for this event?
I believe, I'm not very good at the navigation down there, but if you go to the right and the kind of where the music festival used to be, the Thunder Valley Rally, kind of down in that area.
Okay.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about these different community science opportunities, and I hope this will inspire you to participate in a couple.
I have a couple of questions. Going back to the monarchs, do you know if Arizona has any butterfly buffets to attract monarchs? And Stephen was saying, I know in Southern California we have some, but it's too far and in between.
So is that in reference to the overwintering habitat? I think I'm not aware of any. There have been some efforts to increase milkweed populations. The Tonto National Forest had a volunteer project over the past couple of years where they've gone out to plant and then maintain those milkweed plants over the course of the year to try to attract more monarchs to areas like that. But I think it is just kind of a holdover as they migrate to California or Mexico.
Okay. And another question regarding BioBlitz. How about over in Prescott? Was there any activity over there?
We had a couple observations in the Prescott area last year, and we're hoping that there will be more this year. We've started doing our outreach now, so hopefully we can get some observations from the Upper Verde as well.
Great. Okay. So thank you, Tracy. I think we're now going to go to Elaine. Elaine, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Hi. So welcome, Elaine. So Elaine Nichols, she is also with the Friends of the Verde River. And so you're going to talk to us about community science involving water quality sampling, I guess, right?
Yeah, so Tracy kind of talked about the regional level, so I'll talk about what we're doing at Friends of the Verde River aside from our BioBlitz.
Great.
So yeah, I'll just go through the projects, and then if anyone has questions about the projects, I can answer them as they come up. But I'm Elaine. I'm the Habitat or Restoration Project Manager. I started as an AmeriCorps volunteer working on invasive species removal long ago, and I've been able to work as a seasonal employee with the Coconino National Forest. I earned my master's in environmental management from Western Colorado University, and I've been working on habitat restoration with Friends of the Verde River since 2017. Now, as the restoration project manager, I manage our restoration projects, including invasive plant species removal, landscape restoration, and water quality monitoring. I also get to work with our field crews and our volunteers and our community scientists, and our work is not possible without those people. So I love talking about these opportunities. I'm going to talk about gully busters, water quality monitoring, bird surveys, and our Pretty Verde initiative. So gully busters is a new effort to map and measure areas of high erosion throughout the watershed. So this photo on the right shows a gully system. As these gullies move up the landscape, they decrease the ability for soil to stay in place. In areas where this active erosion is happening, water is less able to be absorbed into the ground, so the plants are less able to survive. And then also, if this soil is lost, it doesn't just disappear, it flows downstream into the river and can decrease the quality of the water. So this volunteer opportunity involves heading out to locations throughout the watershed and search of gullies. So once our volunteers find a gully, they use a tape measure or some measurement tool to measure the height and width of the gullies and collect some information about the plants that are growing and take pictures through an app that we've developed. So if you like hiking with a purpose, navigating, you can use a tape measure and an application on your phone, then Gully Busters should be a great fit for you. This Gully Busters project is upcoming, and we're working to get it started and develop the training for people this upcoming year. Oh yeah. This is what the goal of Gully Busters would be, to identify these areas where we need to install these rock structures. So the rocks, I need to get like a graphics department on this, I think. But so this blue arrow that's coming down is representing water, like a monsoon comes and it flows down and it cuts down that is called a head cut. And then the red is the way that the cut of the ground would move. And if there's no questions on that, I'll move on. But it's just to stabilize this and make sure it's not growing and there's not more soil is leaving and going into the water in the river. So the next program I'll talk about is our water quality monitoring effort. We completed a watershed report card that identified a major need in the watershed for more reliable and timely water quality data. So we went into action and we started a water quality monitoring effort in partnership with Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. We sample sites along Oak Creek right now, and we currently have 2 crews, a weekend crew and a weekday crew, measuring water parameters like temperature and pH, with a major focus on E. coli and turbidity. So we're sampling to try to find places of concern within the watershed. And we're having fun while we do it. Look at all the smiles on those faces. So this is an example of how we would try to figure out. So this is a recreation area. You could see the road in between the 2 points. The people are typically swimming in that area, and our crew will go out on a busy Saturday and get an above sample and a below sample to try to see if they can capture some impact of all the people that are swimming and in the water, and see how that's affecting the water quality. And then also they do the same thing at sites where there are creeks coming in to the river. So they'll do above where the creek comes in and below where the creek comes in to see if they can identify any impacts from that. So once they get the samples, they bring them back to the laboratory and put them in the incubator for 24 hours. And then they need to be counted after 24 hours. So that is a volunteer need that we have right now. It's pretty simple count. It doesn't take more than 20 minutes, but some of our volunteers are not local to Cottonwood, so it's a far drive for them and things like that. So that's one of our needs. And then all this data goes into an online portal that ADQ created. So we also need volunteers to enter the data. We hosted 2 trainings this fall for water quality monitors, and we are in the planning process for the next trainings. I'll go over how to sign up for this in a bit, but if you want to go out with an existing crew and you can't wait for a training, we also have the opportunity to shadow if you want to reach out to me. That's our water quality monitoring. And then we also have a bird survey pilot project. So we started a transect in Dead Horse Ranch State Park last year with some volunteers using the important bird area survey protocol. It's really good to get information about dead horse, especially since it's one of an area where our restoration work has been going on for over 10 years. So getting bird data is understanding the bird populations of the area really can translate to just understanding the entire health of the area. So it's really good to have that information to draw conclusions about our restoration work. And then hashtag Pretty Verde started in 2020. It's completely on your own opportunity. So this is a form. You can go out and clean up litter, and you're also collecting science, because getting those tallies and understanding of what's going on the ground and wherever you like to go out to the river is a really important data that can inform, whether trash cans need to be installed. And this goes directly to ADQ, so they can actually really try to implement anything that's needed based on that data. And that goes for the water quality data as well. By doing those brackets and things, we are working with ADQ, and they're working with the Forest Service, looking for places to put bathrooms and pet waste stations specifically for the E. coli data. We also have data entry needs. It's not the most glamorous, but it is always a huge help. Can't draw any conclusions from the data if it's sitting on a piece of paper and not entered for anyone to use. And then iNaturalist identifiers again, like Tracy mentioned.
Is that something that people can do from home?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Yeah. So if you're not in the Verde Valley, you can still help us.
Nice.
So I just want to show how to sign up to be a volunteer. Go to verderiver.org/volunteer, fill out your information, click community science, and there's a comments at the bottom of this form that you could add as well. And then, yeah, and this is me and Tracy and our two ADQ partners when we first learned how to sample. So I was trying to show you that we have fun out there.
Right. So we've got a couple of questions. Going back to erosion, you mentioned monsoon. Is that what causes most of the erosion in our area?
So erosion is natural, especially with large storms like monsoons, but we're trying to focus on accelerated erosion when it's becoming an issue and it's happening more than it naturally would. And monsoons drive that. Causes are often human induced, like roads or excessive grazing or trails, things like that. That's more what we're focused on.
Okay. And any opportunities for water quality in Prescott?
We are focused on Oak Creek right now. We have plans to expand. We do have one of our team members lives in Prescott and drives over to sample. But yeah, right now we're just Oak Creek focused. We recently we're working to expand though.
Okay, thanks, Elaine.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go to our next guest. That's Kal Mannis. Welcome, Kal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So I know you have a presentation you're going to be sharing about NASA community science projects. And for those of you who don't know, NASA is an acronym for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So while you're bringing that presentation up, I'll share a bit about your background. So Kal is the Senior Director for Rural Programs at the Arizona Science Center. In this role, he is the Project Director and Co-Investigator for the National Science Foundation funded Rural Activation and Innovation Network, or RAIN, and Arizona Hub's Advancing Computer Science, and the NASA funded Broadening Participation with STEM Ecosystems. In addition, he's the state coordinator for Project WILD, W-I-L-D, and Project Learning Tree, and a collaborator on several environmental education programs. This follows almost a decade and a half as a STEM teacher and a regional STEM education coach in the White Mountains. And again, please enter your questions in the Q&A box so you think of them, and I'll share them with Kal. But take it away, Kal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I know we're running down on time, and so I may speed up my presentation. If anybody's interested, they can send a note. I'm happy to share this PowerPoint with them. Like Drew said, I work with the Arizona Science Center, and I work specifically with rural communities. I was approached by NASA a few years ago, a grant that NASA has funded through the Science Mission Directorate, at looking how rural communities can come together and use science. So, interestingly enough, another part of this is a fairly large project, has been supporting community-supported science. Community-supported science, like Nancy, Tracy, and Elaine have mentioned, originally was called citizen science. Over the last few years, there's been a pushback by a lot of people about using that word, citizenship, and essentially because it seems to be an exclusionary word. And so you'll see less and less of that as time moves forward. There's a number of other words that are also coming up, especially around the botany. So notice Tracy used invasive species. There is a movement to not use that vocabulary anymore and use introduced species versus invasive. Much of this comes from the the diversity, equity, and inclusion awareness, and the kind of de-escalating certain types of words. NASA is very aware of this fact and is doing a sweep through almost all of their citizen science projects to rebrand what they're doing. Interestingly enough, NASA's not been known as a citizen science program. It's a government-funded organization that hosts the largest number of active scientists in the United States. Typically, they're ultra specialized. Over the movement that iNaturalist has really pushed out, and then eBirds and Budburst, there's a number of others, the realization was that people really want to be a part of it. They really, the folks outside of NASA, there's a huge number of amateur astronomers, and there are just folks that just think NASA is cool. They want to be involved. So over the last couple of years, there have been several funded programs. And let me kind of speed through this a little bit. The majority of them are focused at providing data. So there's raw data, almost like Elaine was saying, there's a tremendous amount of raw data that has to be collated and gone through and reviewed. Nancy mentioned Tess earlier and the young man who found a planet. There's another young man who was going through some other data sets and has found like 17 brown dwarf stars, which are incredibly difficult to find. Anyway, so these are available. There are a little over a dozen projects right now that are being hosted, and then over the next 2 years, as data is coming in from satellite constellations that are either out or are being launched, more data will be generated. So we anticipate in about 2 years, the James Webb Telescope will have just a huge amount of information. And there very likely will be a community science project around this data. There are a few programs that target schools, one of which is called Growing Beyond Earth. It's actually funded through the Fairchild Garden in Miami, Florida, and they have a growing station that's the same as the one on the International Space Station. So in a classroom or an after-school program, your students could do the same sort of experiments on the ground as are being done in space. Also, and I just found out about this a couple of days ago, that's why it's not on here, there's a set of seeds for trees that have been sent into space and are coming back. And there will be somewhere around 1,000 seedlings that will be available for mainly K-12 educators and higher ed to put in the ground and experiment and see if their space exposure to space has had an impact. It's kind of cool. And there will be a community science project around it. If you're interested, I pulled this up. Let me see if you guys can see it. Can you see this? This is the citizen science page from NASA, and incredibly easy to get to. It's science.nasa.gov/citizen science. And each one of these is a link. It also will give you some background information. There's some duplication just because one program in particular, which I'm going to show you right now, which is called GLOBE, has a number of different observations. Before I get to GLOBE, I wanted to show you this. This is really cool. So if you're interested, what's the proof that people that are not in NASA are really doing the work. You can go to this site, and it's really science.nasa.gov/ it's citizen scientists. And this page comes up, and it's a huge list of folks that are active citizen scientists within NASA from all over the world. It's a very cool read. So just like when people say, well, real people don't do this, and real people really do this. The most active citizen science project right now that NASA funds is probably Globe Observer. Globe Observer has, as you can see, there's a web page, as well as this goes, right now there's a cloud challenge going on, which you can go outside and do. They have a web page, they have an app, and the app is incredibly easy to use. There's a number of different citizen data collections. So right now there's a cloud survey, and they do these competitions throughout the year. So the cloud challenge is on right now. In August and September, there's a mosquito challenge, which when I first heard it, I'm like, NASA, mosquitoes, what's that all about? The reality is that NASA is tracking certain types of mosquitoes to see if there's an impact from climate changes. And since mosquitoes, they're looking at disease vector mosquitoes and seeing if they're moving from their normal habit, their traditional habitat, to other places. And then if so, how far and what's going on. The data is very interesting. There's also a landscape survey and a tree survey. So if you think about it, NASA observational tools look down from space. It's very challenging to tell how tall a tree is when you're looking down at it from on top of it. And so many of these surveys, especially the trees and the landscape, the data is overlaid with remote sensing data. And so the view becomes more three-dimensional, and it provides a greater depth of knowledge for the scientists who are using it. All this data that's collected, it's not just pretty pictures, it's actively being used. The cloud surveys are the same thing. You know, the satellites can look down on a cloud, but they can't see what's on the bottom. And you can. So when you take pictures up, you help to provide a greater depth of knowledge on the structure of clouds, and then how much material is in the air. It's a very interesting observational set. All of this is free, and so you can get to it extremely easily. I would encourage you to do this. You can do it with your family. You can do it with your friends. If you're bored one afternoon and you don't want to watch any more, well, football's kind of over now, but let's say you're not into sports, but you're looking for something to do with your friends, you can do that. You're out hiking. You're doing some work for the Verde River folks. You could do some of these observations as well. So this is not tied to iNaturalist. This is funded by NASA. So Globe is funded by NASA. It's one of the few, these programs that are listed here are all NASA funded because they're coming out of different organizations or different groups within NASA. I'm trying to speed it up. So some of these you do outside, so Globe Observer. There's also not so much here, but there's a lake observation, and there's an aurora observation. So if you happen to be traveling up toward the Arctic Circle or down to Antarctica, you can do Aurorasaurus and become an aurora hunter. Many of these are data reviews. So planet hunters, solar jet hunters, solar grazers, which is actually looking for comets that come near the sun. All of these, you sign up, and many of these are on Zooniverse. which is where a number of it's another aggregating group like iNaturalist, but has a tendency to have more astronomy things. I'm like running. So the next one is SciStarter. SciStarter is another aggregating website where you can search for citizen science projects, and you can. This is mainly geared to the United States or North America. So Canada is in there, and I think some of Mexico is starting to build more material into this search engine. Is essentially what it is. SciStarter is based out of Arizona State University and is really one of the major focal points for finding in things that are interesting to people, because obviously folks have a wide variety of interests. Many organizations have their own page within SciStarter. And I think I was talking with Tracy a couple weeks ago, and Friends of the Verde have a page that is being updated. So they're part of this. It's a really amazing site. And just Google SciStarter. You create your own free account. You can filter, find stuff that you're interested in. Very, very interesting place. Also, they will be hosting, I think it's coming to Arizona this year or next year. There will be an international citizen science conference. So if you're interested in attending one of those, it's available. I put in two other resources in here. One is for folks that are looking at developing a citizen science project or working with their library. So the American Library Association, in collaboration with several other groups, created this guide on, and you can Google Library and Community Guides to Citizen Science, and you'll come up. It's a PDF. It's about 56 pages. Walks you all the way through how to set something up. Incredibly useful if you volunteer, if you're with your local library, or you're working with a nonprofit and they want to do it, but they just don't know how. This is probably one of the best resources that's come out recently. The other piece is the federal government. Many of the U.S. federal departments are setting up citizen science projects, which I thought was interesting. So you can see, as we all know, the federal government is a little bit slower than everybody else. And so this is rolling through the feds. You can do a Google search on citizen science, U.S. government, and it will come up to citizenscience.gov. And it's not a very robust compendium yet, but it is growing, and it's interesting to see what's there. Okay, local libraries, check with your libraries. Many of them have funding for citizen science or have already brought in material for citizen science projects. A number of libraries like Camp Verde Community Library, if you happen to be in the White Mountains, which is where I live most of the time, the Sholo Library, they actually are doing some work with the folks that run SciStarter and have a number of things that you can just check out. They have like bins of things. It's very cool. Don't be afraid to ask your libraries. Surprisingly, libraries, there's a huge push nationwide to have citizen science projects based out of libraries. So, okay, did that pretty fast.
Oops.
Questions?
So we've got a couple of comments from Tracy. So she did confirm they are in SciStarter for the Friends of the Verde River. And then many Verde Valley libraries have BioBlitz kits or backpacks available for checkout. That's good to know. And then additional questions. So Stephen was saying he sees, he counted 27 projects for citizen science on NASA's website. What is your favorite project and why? Do you have one?
So I've been a globe observer for a decade, probably about a decade, because it started, interestingly enough, as a high school, a project for high school science teachers. And in fact, you can look up as Globe, just Globe and not Globe Observer, and it has a series of, I don't know, like 48 different observational protocols that can be incorporated into a science classroom. And so that's how I started. And then I met the developer of Globe Observer at a NOAA conference in Boulder. So this is based out of UC Boulder. And she was so enthused about the development of this app. I think that was probably in 2012 or 2013 that I thought, oh, this is very cool. So I just, right from the beginning when it was made public, I had it on my phone and I was starting to do that. One of the things that they started with was Globe at Night. And so you can look at, there's a calendar of different challenges. Like I said, one of them is Globe at Night, and you look at, you do a star survey. And because so many cities have such intense light pollution, you can see very few stars. And what they're looking at is the movement of the light pollution outward from the cities and how it impacts observations. Really very interesting data. And so that's my favorite one, because it's so easy.
Great. And Lacey was saying or asking, will an email or something be sent with the info links all the speakers shared? So Kal, you mentioned your presentation can be shared. I'll double check with the other speakers as well, but I wanted to mention, and as we wrap up this evening, as I did my research for this event, I did an internet search on the terms community science and citizen science and found a huge list of opportunities that you can participate in. And these projects run the entire spectrum of interesting topics. For example, maybe bird watching isn't your thing, but you love to bake bread, for example. How about a sourdough community science project? And it seems, as Kal mentioned, many museums, universities, government agencies, nonprofits, and other organizations that have a STEM focus also have community science opportunities. So even if you're joining us from outside of Arizona, there are many opportunities to participate in community science projects that are available to everyone. So explore and find a subject that you find an interest in and participate. Your participation really does make an impact, as you've seen. And the opportunities run the gamut from those that require specialized equipment like microscopes and telescopes to those that require only a smartphone or a computer, or even in some cases, no equipment at all. Like I said, I have a list of links that I found during my research. I will email that to everyone attending this evening. And if Kal and the rest of our speakers are willing to share theirs, because I saw a lot of links in those presentations, I will do that. And thank you, Kal, for your presentation there. And finally, before we close this evening, just a quick note about our upcoming Verde Valley Science Cafes. So we have confirmed the next 2 science cafes will also be hosted by Yavapai College, Yavapai College. And if conditions are acceptable and we can meet safely, so we'll keep our fingers crossed, I'm very happy to announce that they will be live events at the Verde Valley Yavapai College campus. We'll investigate if we can also do a Zoom option for our out-of-town friends. We've started some initial planning, and we're planning to hold the first one this fall and the next one in the spring of 2023. And for those of you who are out of town, if you'd like to join us, the fall and spring are just awesome times to visit the amazing Verde Valley. So keep watch for our email announcements. And let's see, I did want to mention, we received reports that an inordinate number of our Eventbrite emails and reminder emails went to recipients' junk and spam folders for this event for some reason. So if you add these email addresses from us to your contacts, then it should go directly to your inbox in the future. And with that, I'd like to thank our guests again, Nancy Steele, Tracy Stevens, Elaine Nichols, and Kal Mannis. And thank you, Yavapai College, for hosting us this evening. Thanks to Dr. Tina Red, the Verde Valley Yavapai College Campus Dean, and Alex Helm Correa, both huge supporters of education in our local community. And thanks to you, our wonderful engaged audience. See you soon at our next Verde Valley Science Cafe. And unless there's other questions, I'm just going to double check real quick. I don't see any more. So thank you all. Have a good night.